The girl was maybe 11 years old, barefoot in the middle of February, standing in the doorway of the most expensive steakhouse in downtown Vancouver, like she belonged there. Nobody moved for a moment. Not the maitre d', not the waitstaff, not the 2 security guards posted near the coat check. They all just stared at her. At the thin cotton dress printed with faded yellow flowers, at her dark braided hair coming loose at the temples, at her feet, bare and red from the cold, and they didn't quite believe what they were seeing. She didn't seem to notice any of them. Her eyes moved slowly across the dining room, past the white tablecloths and the low amber lighting and the businessmen in their suits, until they landed on a corner table near the window. A man in his 50s sat there alone with a boy of about 10, who was in a wheelchair. The man had the kind of posture that comes not from good upbringing, but from decades of being the most powerful person in every room he entered. He was looking at his phone. The girl started walking toward them. "Miss." The maitre d' stepped forward, his voice low and firm. "This is a private establishment. You cannot." She walked past him like he wasn't there. His name was Donald Thorne. If you lived in British Columbia, you knew the name. Thorne Capital, Thorne Properties, the Thorne wing of Vancouver General Hospital, which he'd funded not out of generosity but out of a tax strategy that had saved him considerably more than he'd donated. His photograph appeared in the Financial Post so regularly that the editors kept a file folder of approved headshots, and the caption beneath each one always carried the same 3 words: visionary, relentless, decisive. What the captions didn't say was that his son Joey had been in a wheelchair for 3 years, since a boating accident on Okanagan Lake the summer Joey turned 7. That his wife Miriam had left 18 months after the accident, not because she didn't love Joey. She did, fiercely, but because she couldn't love Donald anymore, and she had finally decided to stop pretending. That Donald had responded to both losses the way he responded to every loss, by working harder, buying more, controlling whatever remained within his reach. Joey was the one thing he could not control, and it frightened him in a way that nothing in 30 years of high-stakes finance ever had. The boy was quiet in the way children become quiet when they've spent too much time around adult grief. He watched things carefully. He drew in a small sketchbook he kept in the side pocket of his wheelchair, careful, detailed drawings of birds mostly. Herons and whiskey jacks and the Anna's hummingbirds that came to the feeder outside his hospital window during the long months of his initial recovery. He rarely complained. He rarely asked for things. He had learned early that his father's love came packaged with impatience, and he had learned to take up less space. Tonight, Donald had brought him to Harlow's because his nutritionist had suggested Joey needed more iron and protein, and because Donald processed guilt through expensive meals in controlled environments. He had been talking at Joey for the better part of 20 minutes about the private school he was considering for the fall, a place in West Vancouver with excellent academic credentials and, more importantly, full accessibility and a nurse on staff. "The program is rigorous," Donald was saying. "But Dr. Amara says you're tracking above grade level in math, which puts you in a strong position for the advanced." "Dad," Joey said. Something in his voice made Donald look up from his phone. The girl was standing beside their table. Up close, she was younger than she'd seemed from across the room, or maybe older. It was hard to tell. Her face had that particular quality sometimes seen in children who've known difficulty early, a steadiness in the eyes that didn't match the softness of the features surrounding them. She was looking not at Donald but at Joey, and she was looking at him the way you might look at someone you recognize from a dream. "I'm hungry," she said, simply and without apology. "If you give me something to eat, I'll help your son walk again." The dining room around them went very quiet. Donald Thorne set down his phone. He was not a man who was often rendered speechless. He had sat across tables from premiers and CEOs and at least one prime minister, and he had never once found himself without a ready response. But this, a barefoot child in a floral dress making this particular claim in this particular setting, landed somewhere outside the categories he kept for managing unexpected situations. Then his face did what his face always did when he felt something he didn't know how to feel. It closed. "That's quite a performance," he said. His voice was measured, almost gentle, the way a scalpel is gentle. "Who sent you?" "One of the servers." "Someone put you up to this?" The girl didn't answer. She was still looking at Joey. "I'm going to need you to leave," Donald said, and raised his hand to signal the security staff who were already moving across the floor toward them. "This is not a place for whatever this is." "Wait, Joey," it was said quietly, but it stopped his father mid-gesture. Joey was looking at the girl with an expression Donald hadn't seen on his son's face in a very long time. Not hope exactly. Hope had been beaten back too many times for either of them to reach for it easily. Something more careful than hope. "Attention. What's your name?" Joey asked her. "Willa," she said. "I'm Joey. I know." Donald's jaw tightened. "How do you know his name?" Willa finally looked at him. Her eyes were the color of the ocean off Tofino in November, gray with a faint blue underneath, and very calm. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I just do." The security staff arrived then, 2 of them, and Donald nodded toward the door. But before either guard could touch her, Willa had already turned back to Joey and said, quite softly, "May I?" She gestured toward his legs. Joey looked at his father. Donald started to say no. The word was already forming, but Joey had already said yes, and something about the certainty in his son's voice made Donald pause. Willa crouched down. She placed both hands on Joey's knees, gently, like she was steadying something that might startle. She closed her eyes. There was nothing dramatic about it. No theatrics, no ceremony. She might have been listening. Then Donald's patience broke. "That's enough," he said, and stood. "I don't know what kind of scheme this is, but my son has been seen by neurologists at 4 of the top hospitals in this country. He has been evaluated by specialists in Toronto, Montreal, and Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. If the medical community at that level cannot help him, I'm quite certain you cannot." He looked at the guards. "Please remove her." One of the guards took Willa gently by the shoulder and guided her toward the exit. She went without resistance, without a word. At the door to the dining room she paused and turned back and looked at Joey. "It'll start soon, Sheen." "Don't be scared." Then she was gone. Donald sat back down. The dining room slowly resumed its ambient noise, the clink of cutlery, the low murmur of conversation, the soft footfalls of servers moving between tables. He reached for his water glass and became aware that his hand wasn't entirely steady. "You didn't have to do that," Joey said. "Joey." "She wasn't hurting anything." "She was." Donald stopped. He didn't finish the sentence because he couldn't decide what she had been. Disturbing, perhaps. A disturbance. "People take advantage," he said finally. "They see a child in a wheelchair and they see an opportunity. I'm not going to let that happen to you." Joey was quiet for a moment. Then, "My legs feel warm." Donald put his glass down. "What? Like warm water moving up?" Joey's face was uncertain, watching his own experience from the inside, with the careful attention of a boy who'd learned not to trust his own body. "Like when your hand falls asleep and then wakes up, but..." He stopped. "Dad, my toes are moving." Donald was out of his chair before he knew he'd stood. He crouched down in front of the wheelchair, right there in the middle of Harlow's restaurant, and he looked at his son's feet. Joey's right foot was moving, barely, trembling, but moving. The toes curling and uncurling with a small, certain deliberateness that Donald recognized immediately as voluntary. "My God," Donald said. He wasn't a religious man. He hadn't been in 30 years, but he said it anyway. "We need to find her," he said, and he was already standing, already reaching for his coat, already gesturing for the check and the keys and everything else at once. "Now. We need to find her right now." They found Willa 3 blocks away, sitting on the steps of a parkade, eating a granola bar someone had given her. She didn't run when she saw Donald coming. She just watched him approach with those calm ocean eyes and waited. "What did you do?" he said. He'd run the last half block. He couldn't remember the last time he'd run. "How did you do that?" "I didn't do anything to him," Willa said. She finished the granola bar and folded the wrapper into a small, neat square. "I just reminded his body." Reminded it of what? That it knows how to move. She looked past him to where Joey was sitting in his chair, moving his feet in small experimental circles, watching them with an expression of pure wonder. "It's like a song you forget you know. You just need to hear the first few notes. That's not." Donald stopped. He had approximately 40 things to say, all of them rational, and none of them felt adequate. "Where did you come from? Where are your parents?" "My mom's working," Willa said. "She works nights. Where do you live?" Willa looked at him steadily. "We live in the east side." "Why?" Donald crouched down so they were at eye level. He was not accustomed to crouching. His knees protested. "I need to understand what you are, what you can do." My son has been paralyzed for 3 years. Do you understand that? 3 years. The finest neurologists in the country have told me there is no realistic prospect of recovery. And you—" He stopped again. "Come back with us, please. I'll pay you whatever you want." Something shifted in Willa's expression. Not unfriendliness, exactly. More like the careful assessment of someone who'd heard that word, pay, used as both a promise and a threat, and knew the difference. "I don't need your money," she said. "Then what do you need?" Willa considered him for a long moment. "To know that you won't make it into something," she said. "What I can do. I don't want it to be a thing." Donald Thorne, who had spent 30 years making things, into assets, into leverage, into headlines, said, "I understand." He wasn't sure yet that he did. Finding Willa's mother took 2 days and approximately the same level of resources Donald typically deployed to acquire a mid-size company. Her name was Sylvia Ossie. She was 41 years old, and she worked the overnight shift at a distribution warehouse in Burnaby. Before that, she had worked for 7 years as an administrative coordinator at Thorne Capital's downtown Vancouver office. She had been let go in what the internal memo called a strategic workforce realignment in the spring of 2019. She had been 3 months into a pregnancy she hadn't yet disclosed. Donald sat with this information in his car outside his office building for a long time. He had not personally reviewed the list of employees terminated in that realignment. He had approved the budget reduction and left the specifics to HR. He had been in Singapore when the letters went out, closing a deal that added $400 million to the Thorne Capital portfolio, numbers on a spreadsheet. That's what they'd been to him. He knew this. He had never particularly minded knowing it. He minded now. Sylvia's apartment was in East Vancouver, a 3rd-floor walk-up in a building that had been old when Donald was young. He went alone. He didn't want witnesses for this particular conversation. He wasn't sure yet what kind of conversation it was going to be. She opened the door in her work clothes. Still in them, he realized, having just come off the overnight shift. She looked at him the way you look at something you've been half expecting to arrive eventually. "Mr. Thorne," she said. "Mrs. Ossie." He paused. "May I come in?" She stepped back from the door. The apartment was small and scrupulously clean. A library book on the coffee table, a pair of child's sneakers by the door, worn down to near nothing at the toes. A drawing tacked to the wall beside the kitchen, a heron in meticulous pencil standing in shallow water. Not Willa's, Donald thought. Wrong hand. Joey's. He recognized the precision of it. "Willa told me you'd come," Sylvia said. She didn't sit down. She stood by the kitchen counter with her arms crossed, not in hostility but in self-containment, the posture of someone who had learned long ago to take up only as much space as strictly necessary. "She told me your son's name and that you'd want more. Is she here?" "She's at school." Sylvia's chin lifted slightly. "She goes to school, Mr. Thorne. Every day. She gets herself up and makes her own breakfast and walks 6 blocks in whatever weather we're having, and she has an 87 average, and she is 11 years old, and I will not let her become someone's miracle." "I'm not here to." "You are," Sylvia said, not unkindly. "You may not know it yet, but you are. It's what men like you do. You see something valuable and your first instinct is to secure it, to structure it, to ensure exclusive access." She looked at him steadily. "I've watched you do it from across an office for 7 years. I know how you operate." The silence that followed had weight to it. "You worked for me," Donald said. "I worked for Thorne Capital," Sylvia said. "I doubt you knew my name." He hadn't. That was the truth of it, and they both knew it, and there was no useful way to move around it. "I'm sorry," he said. Sylvia looked at him, the way you look at a word that might be genuine or might be performance, trying to determine which. "For which part?" she said. "For firing you when you were pregnant, for the way it was done." "For," he stopped, "I approved a cost reduction without looking at who was on the list. You were a person, and I treated you like a line item." He looked around the small, careful apartment. "You've been struggling for years because of a decision I made without thinking. I don't know how to make that right, but I'd like to try." Sylvia was quiet for a long moment. "Willa wants to keep helping your son," she said finally. "Not because of you. She doesn't do things because of adults. She does them because she decides to." She paused. "She told me his legs are starting to remember. She says it takes time. What does she want in return?" Sylvia smiled, and it was the first smile she'd shown him. Thin, a little sad, but real. She wants him to send her one of his bird drawings. She saw some on his school's website. She thinks they're beautiful. She paused. That's it. That's all she asked for. Donald looked at the heron on the wall again. He thought about his son, sitting in the restaurant, watching his own feet move for the first time in 3 years. He thought about a 7-year-old who'd learned to stop asking for things, and an 11-year-old who'd walked barefoot through February to give something away. I have a property, he said quietly. In Kitts. A house, 2 bedrooms. It's been sitting empty since I acquired it in a portfolio sale. I'd like you to have it. Sylvia's expression shifted. Have it, own it. I'll transfer the title. No conditions, no strings. He paused. Think of it as 3 years of back pay. The silence this time was different, longer. He watched something move across her face, suspicion, exhaustion, the particular wariness of someone who'd been disappointed too many times to lean into good news easily. And when Willa's done helping your son, Sylvia said, and you don't need her anymore. What then? Then you have a house, Donald said. That doesn't change. She studied him. I'll think about it, she said. I'm not saying no, but I'm not saying yes until my daughter is done, and it's done on her terms, and she decides when that is. Of course, and you don't tell anyone. Not your friends, not the press, not the hospital. She looked at him directly. Willa is not a story. I understand. He meant it this time. Willa came on Tuesdays and Thursdays after school, walking off the bus at the corner of Granville and West 41st, with her backpack and her running shoes and her quiet self-possessions, and she and Joey would spend an hour in the sunroom of Donald's house in Shaughnessy working on what she called, simply, the remembering. It was not mystical, from the outside. She would have him stand. She would hold his hands while he tried. She seemed to know before he did, when he was about to wobble, and she steadied him with a natural ease that made Donald think of someone who had always known where the tilting points were. There were days it went beautifully. Joey walking the length of the sunroom, then the hallway, then the back garden on a mild March afternoon, with the cherry trees just beginning to blossom. And there were days it went badly, days when the progress seemed to have vanished overnight. And Joey could barely stand without his legs buckling, and Donald would feel the old panic rising in his chest like floodwater. On one of these bad days, when Joey had retreated to his room discouraged, and Donald was standing in the kitchen gripping the counter, Willa came and leaned against the doorframe and watched him. It's not going backwards, she said. It just looks like it. 3 years, Donald said. 3 years and nothing, and now, he stopped. He didn't want to name what he was feeling. He had spent 30 years not naming what he was feeling. You're scared, Willa said. It was said so plainly without judgment or particular gentleness that it got past his defenses before he had a chance to raise them. Yes, he said. That's okay, Willa said. Being scared means you love him. You just got confused for a while about what that looked like. Donald looked at this child leaning in his kitchen doorway, skinny, unsentimental, eating an apple she'd taken from the bowl on the counter without asking. And he thought, who made you so certain? Can I ask you something? He said. Sure. How do you know where the problem is? When you... He searched for language. When you help someone. It's like static, she said, like a radio station that's almost tuned in but not quite. I can feel where it's fuzzy, and sometimes I can just. She moved her hand in a small adjusting gesture, like turning a dial. Help it tune. And you've always been able to do this, since I was small. She took another bite of the apple. My mom was scared of it at first, but she says the things that are really yours, you don't choose them. You just figure out how to carry them. Donald thought about that for a long time after Willa had gone back to sit with Joey. He called a family meeting with his lawyers in April. Not to discuss an acquisition or a liability, but to review the terms of the mass layoffs from 2019. He wanted a full accounting, names, circumstances, severance packages, what had happened to people afterward. His chief legal counsel had stared at him across the table with an expression Donald recognized as professional concern for his mental state, and had asked whether this was related to any pending litigation. No, Donald said. It's related to the fact that I should have done it 4 years ago. The accounting was not comfortable reading. Sylvia Osei was not the only one who'd been let go in circumstances that were, to put it charitably, poorly considered. There had been a man named Gilbert whose wife was undergoing chemotherapy at the time, a woman named Adaora who had been with the company for 11 years and received her walking papers with no more ceremony than a form letter. 43 people in total, and Donald made himself read every name, every file, every note from HR. He did not do this to punish himself. He did it because he had decided that it was no longer acceptable to not know. Sylvia accepted the house in Kitsilano in May, on the condition, which she had put in writing, with her own lawyer, that it be structured as a purchase, not a gift, at a price below market value that she could make manageable payments on over 10 years. "I won't be a charity case," she told him. "You're not a charity case," he said. "You're someone I owe a debt I can't fully repay." "No," Sylvia said firmly. "We do this clean. I buy the house. You receive fair payment. Nobody owes anyone anything." Donald had found, over the months of knowing her, that Sylvia Ozzie was one of the most immovably principled people he had ever encountered, and that this quality, which had probably cost her a great deal over the years, was the one he admired most. He agreed to her terms. The journalist found them in June. Her name was Billionaire, and she wrote for a national magazine out of Toronto, and she had a gift for precisely the kind of story Donald most feared, the kind that was true and human and impossible to contain once it was out. She had been in Harlow's the night Willa walked in. She had been at a table near the bar, on assignment for something else entirely, and she had seen everything. Donald met her at a coffee shop in Gastown, alone, at 7 in the morning, because he had learned by now that avoidance was expensive. "I want you to understand something," he said, before she could open her notebook. "Whatever you write, there is a child involved. An 11-year-old girl whose mother has worked very hard to give her a normal life. Whatever you do with this story, that is what you're affecting." Billionaire set down her coffee. She was younger than he'd expected and considerably calmer. "I've spoken with families," she said carefully. "There are rumors of a healing foundation. People are already talking. People are already speculating," Donald said. "There's no story yet. I'm asking you to consider what the story costs. What are you offering in exchange?" Donald had thought about this carefully. "Access," he said, "not to Willa, not to anything involving her, but to the decisions I'm making at Thorn Capital, policy changes, a review of the 2019 layoffs and what I'm doing to address them, the human cost of a certain kind of business culture and what one company is trying, imperfectly, to do differently." He paused. "That's a better story, longer legs, more people it matters to." Preeti was quiet for a moment, turning her coffee cup in her hands. "If I find out there are others," she said, "other children, other healings, then we talk again," Donald said. "And you'll have my number," she agreed, conditionally, with the clear understanding, delivered with a precision he respected, that she was a journalist and not in the business of covering things up, and that if the story surfaced elsewhere, she would pursue it. "Fair enough," Donald said. He called Sylvia on his way back to the car. "There's a journalist," he said. "I think I've managed it. At least for now. But you should know." "Willa already knew," Sylvia said. "How?" "She told me last night. She said there was someone watching that night at the restaurant and that she'd been thinking about it." "She said." Sylvia paused, and he could hear something in her voice that might have been wonder, or might have been exhaustion from years of wondering. "She said it was okay, that some things come out eventually, and when they do, the people involved decide what they mean." Joey took his first independent steps in the garden on a Thursday afternoon in late June, between the rose beds that Donald had never paid much attention to before, and now somehow couldn't stop looking at. They were small steps, 6 of them from the garden bench to the low stone wall, without holding anything. He stood there at the wall with his hands at his sides, breathing hard, and then he turned around and looked at his father. Donald was crying. He hadn't cried in, he couldn't remember how long. He had attended his mother's funeral dry-eyed and his marriage end dry-eyed, and somewhere in the years between he had decided that tears were a kind of structural weakness he could not afford. He was crying now, and he did not try to stop himself. Willa was sitting on the garden bench eating a peach she'd brought in her backpack, watching Joey with quiet satisfaction, the way a person watches something that has gone exactly the way they expected it to go. "There," she said. Joey laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, the laugh of a 10-year-old who had just done something incredible. And Donald crossed the garden and hugged his son, crouching down to hold him, feeling the solidity of him, the boy standing on his own 2 feet. "I did it," Joey said into Donald's shoulder. You did, Donald said. You absolutely did. From the bench, Willa said, he'll still need physio, and there will be hard days. But the hard days come and go. I know, Donald said without releasing his son. We'll go through them. The Thorn Foundation opened quietly in September with Sylvia Osei as its Director of Community Outreach, a title that did not begin to capture what she actually did, which was to bring the particular rigor of someone who had survived the system to the work of making it less destructive. The Foundation's stated purpose was to connect families who had exhausted conventional treatment pathways with vetted alternative care and community support. Its actual purpose was somewhat more layered and known only to a small number of people, and it functioned on terms that Sylvia had written herself and Donald had signed without objection. Willa's role, such as it was informal and entirely voluntary, and she did not come to the office, and most people who benefited from the Foundation's work never knew she existed. That was how she wanted it. She was in grade 6 now, getting herself up in the mornings and walking to school 6 blocks through the West Coast autumn, and she had joined the drawing club at the community center on Tuesdays, where a retired animator taught perspective and proportion to 12 kids in a room that smelled like tempera paint. She was learning birds. Joey sent her the heron drawing in August, framed, with a note in his careful 11-year-old handwriting. You said you liked this one. I made a better one for you. Thank you for everything. Your friend, Joey. Willa put it up on the wall of her room in the Kitsilano house, beside the window that looked out over the back garden, where a real heron landed sometimes in the early mornings, standing very still in the damp grass, like it was listening for something beneath the surface. On a Saturday in October, Donald took Joey to Stanley Park. They walked the seawall, Joey on his own 2 feet, slowly, stopping when he needed to, leaning on his father's arm on the steeper sections, not because he had to, but because it felt right. The mountains were out across the water, white-capped and enormous, and the air smelled like salt and rain, and the particular cleanness of the Pacific coast in autumn. Dad, Joey said, at the point where the seawall curves west and the whole city opens up behind you. Yeah, are you happy? Donald looked out at the water. Yes, he said, I think I am. Joey nodded, considering this. He had his sketchbook tucked under his arm. He brought it everywhere now, filling it with the things he saw, the things he noticed. Willa says that's the other part of it. What is? The healing. Joey looked up at him with his mother's eyes, dark and patient and careful. She says the outside part people can see is just the beginning. The inside part takes longer. Donald thought about 43 names in an HR file, about a woman who'd bought her own house rather than accept a gift, about the particular discipline it takes to carry something that isn't a choice, about a boy who'd learned to stop asking for things and was learning, slowly, to start again. She's right, he said. Joey leaned against him, just slightly, the way you lean against something solid when you're tired from walking and still have a long way to go. I know, he said. She usually is. They stood there for a while, the two of them, watching the water move. A great blue heron flew low over the harbor and settled on a rock below the seawall, folding its wings with absolute certainty, like it had always known exactly where it was going to land. Joey had his sketchbook out before Donald even thought to say anything. He watched his son draw, the sure, intent movements of a child who had found his way back to himself and understood, without needing anyone to tell him, that this was what healing looked like when it was finished. Not the moment the legs began to move, but this, a boy standing on solid ground in the October air, paying careful attention to a living thing and finding it worth the effort to get it right.